Red Riding Hood runs into on her journey. Now remember, Red is an innocent little girl, I would say 7 at the absolute oldest, so she doesn't quite understand how much of a threat that wolf is. He asks her how she's doing, what she's up to, and where she's headed, and the little girl answers honestly. Maybe a little too honestly. She not only says that she's bringing food to her sick grandma, she also says exactly where her grandma lives. A good quarter of a league farther on in the wood. Her house stands under the 3 large oak trees, and the nut trees are just below. The wolf thought Red was delicious, but he knew if he played his cards right, he could snag both her and her grandma. So he came up with a plan to distract her. He tells Riding Hood to look around the beautiful forest and appreciate her surroundings. Listen to the birds chirping, smell the beautiful flowers, and even pick a few if she wants. The girl reasons it would be nice to bring her grandma some flowers, so she does exactly what her mother warned her not to and leaves the path to go pick some. Only every time she plucks one, she sees a more beautiful flower just a little bit further away, and before you know it, she's wandered completely astray. Meanwhile, the wolf is running to Grandma's house as fast as he can. He impersonates Red Riding Hood so Grandma would let him in, and as soon as that door is open, he gobbles her right up. Then he put on her nightgown and cap, shut the curtains, and laid in bed waiting for Red to get there. When she shows up a few minutes later, she notices right away that something is off because Grandma's door is wide open. When she goes inside, she pulls back the curtains to see Grandma lying in bed with her cap pulled over her face, looking very strange. Here's where that classic dialogue comes in. Riding Hood says, "Grandmother, what big ears do you have?" And the imposter says, "The better to hear you with, my son." Red also points out her Grandma's rather large eyes and hands, but apparently those are just for seeing and hugging. Now that terrible big mouth, that's for eating. And Riding Hood learns this when she points it out to the big bad wolf, and he responds by eating her. Since he just maxed out on not 1, but 2 helpless victims, the wolf is tired and feeling a nap. So he lays back down in Grandma's bed and passes out. A short while later, a huntsman walks by Grandma's house and notices she left the front door open, which is pretty unusual for her. As he approaches, he sees that Grandma's nowhere to be found, and sleeping in her place is the wolf he's been hunting for quite some time. He whispers menacingly under his breath,
"Do I find you here, old sinner? I have long sought you."
And he's about to blow him away with a blast from his gun when he realizes Grandma could still be saved. While the wolf is sleeping, the huntsman takes a pair of scissors and cuts him open. First he pulls out Red Riding Hood, who is terrified of how dark it was in the wolf's stomach, and then he pulls out Grandma, who's barely breathing but still clinging to life. The 3 of them get some large rocks to fill the wolf's stomach in their place, and then they sew him up. When he wakes up, he realizes he's surrounded and tries to run away, but the rocks were so heavy that he just collapsed and died right on the spot. The huntsman takes the wolf pelt home as his trophy for another kill. Grandma eats her cake and drinks her wine, and Red Riding Hood learned a valuable lesson about straying from her path and divulging private information to strangers. Now, what's unique about this story is the Grimm brothers wrote a sort of epilogue to show that Red really did learn her lesson. Sometime later, while on her way to Grandma's again, she runs into another wolf, but this time she ignores him, keeps her eyes forward, and runs straight to her grandmother's house and locks the door behind her so he can't get in. Similar to the last wolf, a few minutes later, this one knocks on the door, pretending to be Little Red Riding Hood, hoping to trick Grandma. But obviously that's not going to work this time. After realizing this, he comes up with another strategy. Wait on the roof until nightfall when Red has to leave and gobble her up in the darkness. But Grandma knew what he was up to, so she devised an even better plan. She told Red there was a big trough right in front of her house, and to fill it with the water she used to boil sausages the day before. As the trough gets more and more filled, the wolf catches the scent of them sausages and sticks out his nose for another whiff. When he does this, he loses his footing and slides right off the roof into the trough and drowns. Little Red was able to skip home safely that same night, and no one did anything to harm her ever again. Must be nice. Now that was how the Brothers Grimm decided to tell the story of Little Red Riding Hood. And while it's pretty similar to the first official version by Charles Perrault, which we're talking about next, it's got a few distinct differences. Firstly, in Perrault's story, which was published in 1697 in a book called Tales and Stories of the Past with Morals, Tales of Mother Goose, Red Riding Hood's mother is much less naggy and doesn't give her as specific instructions for how to get to Grandma's house, nor does she warn her to stay on the path. Also, instead of bringing her sick grandma a cake and some wine, she's bringing her a piece of cake and a little pot of butter. I don't know what kind of diets these people were on, but I understand why their lifespans were so short. Unlike the Grimm story where the wolf tricks Red into straying from the path, in this one she does it on her own by chasing butterflies and picking flowers. Eventually on her journey she runs into the wolf, and the only thing that stops him from eating her right there is the woodcutters watching from nearby. But it's a good thing he was patient, because like last time, Red spills the beans on what she's doing and where her grandma lives, so he sends her on a roundabout way while he takes the shortcut. He races to her grandma's, eats her up real quick because apparently he hadn't eaten in 3 shows up, he tells her to come in. Instead of disguising himself as Grandma, he's pulled the curtain shut so it's mostly dark inside, and he hides under the covers so Red can't see him. While impersonating Grandma, he tells her to put the food on the stool, take off her clothes, and join him in bed. You heard that right, by the way. He did tell her to take off her clothes, but don't ask me why. She gets into bed with him, and here's where that classic exchange makes another appearance. She questions why her grandma has such big arms, legs, ears, and eyes, and then learns the hard way what those big teeth were for. The wolf eats Red Riding Hood in one swift motion, and the story's over. Seriously. Initially, audiences responded to this ending the same way I did, and I would imagine how you did as well, by asking, what was the point of that? And Perrault eventually came out and clarified what the moral of his story was. Children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers, for if they should do so, they may well provide dinner for a wolf. I say wolf, but there are various kinds of wolves. There's also those who are charming, quiet, polite, unassuming, complacent, and sweet, and who pursue young women at home and in the street. And unfortunately, it's these gentle wolves who are the most dangerous ones of all. The story may be a bit strange, but I'd say that's a lesson we can all get on board with. If you're a little kid, don't talk to strangers, because you never know what stranger is a wolf in sheep's clothing. The Perrault story is an interesting one, but the legend of Riding Hood goes back even farther than 1697. If you dig a little deeper, you can find another fable with an awfully similar plot called The False Grandmother, which can be traced back to 10th century Italy. There it was called La Finta Nonna, and the antagonist actually wasn't a wolf. Depending on the version you read, he could either be a werewolf or a female ogre, apparently called an ogress. In this edition, Red Riding Hood also doesn't have a name. She's referred to as Little Girl throughout the story. And instead of bringing cake or wine or butter to her sick grandma, she brings a hot loaf of bread and some milk to her grandma, who apparently just needed some milk and bread. Didn't have groceries. We've all been there. On her way over, the girl comes to a fork in the road where either a werewolf or ogress is waiting for her. The monster already seems to know where grandma lives, so instead of interrogating the little girl, it simply tells her to take Needles Road while it takes Pins Road. Get it? Pins and needles? Well, it turns out those roads actually contain what their names infer. So while the little girl spends time picking up literal needles on Needles Road, the monster goes to Grandma's house, eats her, and then puts a chunk of her flesh and a bottle of her blood in the pantry. We don't know how the monster disguised itself this time around, but we do know that when the little girl got to her grandma's house, she didn't realize it was an imposter. And as a result, something disgusting happened. Probably the most grotesque thing we've ever discussed on this show. Under the orders of the monster, the little girl goes to the pantry, drops off the milk and bread, and then takes the slab of meat and bottle of wine from off the shelf and eats them. And that's now something you can't unknow. In the original Red Riding Hood story, she literally eats the flesh and drinks the blood of her grandma. In alternate versions, she also eats her ears and teeth, thinking it's just more meat and beans, and then complains when they're too hard to chew. Trash can's right here if you need it. At this point, Grandma's cat, who wasn't mentioned before and is never brought up again, sits at the little girl's feet and shames her for what she's eating. The exact quote is pretty intense. He says, "A slut is she who eats the flesh and drinks the blood of her grandmother." Before you ask, I'm not one to slut shame. I have no opinion in this. If you want to eat the flesh and drink the blood of your grandma, I'm not going to shame you and call you a slut, but this cat will. And the little girl responds to his accusation by saying, "Did you just call me a slut?" and punting him out the window. Just kidding, but she should have. Instead, the cat's weird little comment about eating grandparents somehow didn't resonate with the girl, and she finished her dinner. And then, similar to the Perrault story, the monster tells the little girl to take off her clothes and throw them in the fire because she won't need them anymore. What makes it weirder is that he orders her to remove them one article at a time. And then, when the girl gets into bed, those classic lines make another appearance. She questions why her grandma is so hairy, why her nails are so long, why her arms and shoulders are so big. It's crazy how far back we've gone, and this conversation is still in the story. In some versions, this is where she gets eaten and the story ends, similar to Perrault. But in others, the monster literally says, "The better to eat you with," and nothing happens. Instead, at this moment, the girl realizes that whoever she's laying in bed with has a tail, and there's no way her grandma could have a tail. So she comes up with a plan to escape right on the spot. She tells the monster she has to go to the bathroom, and it tells her to just go into bed, which is disgusting. Pea-soaked bed aside, you're planning on eating this girl. Do you really want her covered in pee? Well, it turns out that she thinks that's weird too, and insists that she be allowed outside. So the monster let her go, but he tied a rope around her ankle so he could yank her back. Remember, in his mind, he's still fooling her, so he can't risk escorting her outside, first seeing what he is, and then running away. She's a smart one, though, so when she gets outside, outside, she ties the rope around a tree and starts running home. After a minute or so goes by, the monster starts getting annoyed, and when he tries pulling back the girl, he realizes she's no longer attached. He springs out of bed and chases after her as fast as he can, but he only catches up in time to see her make it safely to her house, and that's how the story ends. So those were the three most popular versions of the Little Red Riding Hood fable. Just a refresher, the Grimm brothers came out in 1856, Perrault was published in 1697, and the last one can be traced back as a folk tale to the 10th century. Supposedly, the story was traded among French peasants around that time period, and it slowly made its way to Italy. But it doesn't stop there. Cultural anthropologists have found versions of Little Red Riding Hood dating back almost 3,000 years to ancient Greece. That version was attributed to the famous writer Aesop. I tried to find which of Aesop's fables was the most similar to it so I could share it with you guys, and I read at least 25 of Aesop's writings with the word wolf in the title, and none of them were even close. So I don't know which one the anthropologists were referring to. Another version we didn't cover was called the Tiger Grandma, or Granddad Tigress, and it can be traced back all the way to China during the Qing Dynasty. The reason I didn't want to go in depth on that one is it plays out exactly like all the other stories we covered, but replaces the wolf with the tiger. Don't get me wrong, it's a pretty cool switch, but not one worth going over in detail. So tell me, Solo fan, what did you think of Riding Hood's origin stories? Were they as dark as you were hoping? If not, you're probably a psychopath, because it doesn't get much darker than a little girl being tricked into eating her grandma's remains. Except for the ending of Fox and the Hound, that is. That was on another level. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. What story was your favorite? Like always, if you enjoyed this episode of Messed Up Origins, make a point to smash that like button with all your hearts. We can reach our goal of 10,000 likes and keep our family growing. Also, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to join the notification fam and receive alerts whenever new Messed Up content gets delivered to your sub box. If you want to stay updated on the Messed Up Origins series, what projects I'm working on next, or if you just want to say hey, you can follow me on social media. I got the handles right in front of you and links down below. Until next time, Solo fam, my name is John Solo, and remember, John shot first.